You're listening to the When Life Hands You Lemons podcast.
But in an entry-level film production, it's one strike and you're out. You're fired. I'm not calling you back.
If your goal today is to make a basket, we're gonna make that basket.
The minute you create something, as soon as it's made tangible, you have a copyright in it.
How do I get our guys to sound that big, that full when they do the harmonies?
And I'm your host, Lennon Seahawk. Let's get to the show. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of When Life Hands You Lemons. This week's episode features Mr. William Tenney, and he is the head of streaming strategy and promo at Crush Music, which is the management company for artists like Lorde, Sia, Green Day, Alec Benjamin, and a number of other artists. Now, he gets into the weeds of what he does every day at Crush Music, and we talk about that stuff. We talk about the importance of music data, how he gets that data, what he does with that data, whether it's an API from Spotify or Apple Music, and how he ingests it into artificial intelligence and has his own kind of custom-built platform to really gather data and help push the music and really get these artists known and make them more discovered. We also talk about music discovery and how interesting it is that Spotify and Apple Music have these crazy algorithms that can really pinpoint what kind of music you're listening to and what you would potentially like. For example, 10, 15 years ago when streaming didn't even exist and CDs were very prominent, if you liked a song, you would have to buy the whole CD and you would spend $10, $15, $20 on a CD to listen to maybe one or two tracks. And you weren't able to discover new music. The only way to really find new music was on the radio. And people were starting to pick up on the internet and whatnot. But this was before YouTube and Apple Music and iTunes and all this stuff. So the music discovery is incredibly different and it's so much more robust today. So we talk about that. We also talk about you getting your music in department stores and what that's like. Maybe there's specific websites you can use. How do you do it? Why is it important? Maybe some of the psychology behind it, who to contact, all that stuff. So before I let you go and we dive into the conversation, I want to remind you to please sign up to my mailing list as it helps me notify you when new episodes like this are live. I would also appreciate a 5-star rating and a review on Apple Podcasts as it helps the podcast be discovered by new listeners. I would also appreciate you if you check out my website, lennonseahawk.com. You can also follow me on Instagram, which is just Lennon Seahawk. I will link all that in the show notes below. Lastly, there is a guest request form, so if you or somebody you know would be a good guest for the show, please fill out that form. So without further ado, let's dive into my conversation with William Tenney. Cool. Well, let's just dig in. Where are you coming to us from?
So right now I'm in New York City. My girlfriend and I actually just moved out of Manhattan across the river into Long Island City. So we've been here for about 2 months now. And earlier on in quarantine, we had sort of used the opportunity to go to LA for a couple months. We rented a condo there. And before that, we were living in Manhattan. So
cool.
Full circle.
What's it like moving in New York during quarantine?
You know what? We moved when we had moved out of our apartment in Manhattan. It was really weird because it was peak quarantine. So
sure.
Fifth Avenue, which is usually packed, was a ghost town.
Mm-hmm.
And that was weird. I think people still weren't really sure about how it was transmitted. I think not that people aren't being careful now, but they were being hyper cautious then. So,
sure.
We went in, we had gloves on and we had masks on, and we sort of felt like we were going into the danger zone to move out of our Manhattan apartment. We were staying with my parents in Connecticut at the time.
Okay.
But then moving into this apartment, I would say it was a lot smoother. I think people had a better grasp on it.
Sure.
And it was a little bit more smooth sailing.
Mm-hmm. Because you guys were the epicenter there for quite a while, probably a month.
Yeah, it was the COVID party here for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's not good. But yeah, everything is good. Your family's all good. You guys are good.
Yeah, everyone's healthy and safe. So
good.
Thankful for that so far.
Yeah, absolutely.
You as well, I hope?
Yes.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah, family's good. Yeah, I'm good. Cool. So tell us a little bit about yourself so we can get kind of a basic understanding of who you are and where you come from.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. I'll try to give you the condensed version.
Sure.
I've wanted to be for those of you who don't know, I'm William Tenney. If you haven't read the description yet, I've wanted to be in the music business my entire life. I was one of these weird kids who knew really early on that he wanted to be a record executive. Some kids want to be firefighters or astronauts, and I was like, I want to do that. And I kind of got in like everyone does. I started a band in high school, actually a little bit before high school, and was always just trying to do music seriously. And that, turned into touring and turned into getting a faux record deal and management and touring all over North America and a little bit in the UK and a little bit in Canada. And when all that was said and done, I went back to school. I went to Northeastern University in Boston. I studied music business and traditional business, and just moved on to the next thing, which, I thought naturally was working on the business side. So I briefly, after school, went and worked in finance for a couple of years, which was really just to raise money to start my business. I started a label and consulting company here in New York City in 2015, which eventually led me to Crush Music, where I am now. I'm the head of streaming strategy and promotion here, where I've been for 5 years.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about your band. What kind of band was it?
It's funny, man. I just did another podcast last week, and I totally wasn't expecting to talk about that. I didn't, but I'm learning that people are more and more interested in this portion of the story. So
it helps build a foundation of who you are, and why did you go from being a musician to being on the business side? Like, that transition is kind of interesting to me.
Well, I think when you're a kid, right, there's no kids that can be out there doing business at least well, I don't think, right? Like you can kind of be doing it, but it's like you're a kid, right? You don't really have access to resources. Sure. People aren't really taking you seriously for the most part, and you kind of just have to bootstrap it. So it was a lot easier for me with what I had at my fingertips, which was like my parents willing to put me in music lessons, and to, be generous enough to supply me with instruments to play with. It was a lot easier for me to get into music that way. So, as soon as I was able to do that, and I learned very early on, 5 years old, I think 6 years old, that I liked playing music, turned piano lessons into guitar, and guitar into drums, and drums into bass, and everything that I could get my hands on, I wanted to play if it made noise. So anyway, the band, it kind of started in middle school. I wanted to do music seriously, but, you can't really find kids that a lot of the time that want to do it with you at the level you want. So I was always organizing talent shows and trying to make records. I had a 4-track tape recorder, a Tascam tape recorder my dad bought for me. And I was always trying to make records and just do it for real, like I had seen in the magazines. And then finally in high school, I had convinced a couple kids to maybe do it semi-serious with me. We were at sort of the peak of the mid 2000s second wave sort of commercial pop rock movement. So, bands like All Time Low had just gone to MTV. All the major labels were doing big deals with these like alt rock, you call them emo leaning bands. We the Kings had just gotten signed to a three album deal. Boys Like Girls was huge.
Love Boys Like Girls. Good Charlotte was around.
Yeah, there you go. So this is actually a little bit after, but Good Charlotte came out with that, out of the box record, Young and the Hopeless, that broke them out in the early 2000s. And this was kind of like the second wave, where it was almost making its, those records were influencing the next generation. So, and I had grown up on punk rock music, so I really wanted to ride that. And we just started trying to make records like that and play shows anywhere we could. And, eventually people just started showing up, and then 25 turned into 50 into 100, and then we were talking to managers, and we were opening for a lot of those guys. those bands.
Did it come as kind of a surprise to you, or were you kind of anticipating this as you were kind of playing each show?
I think when we started really being able to sell like real tickets, like that's kind of a turning point, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was a surprise because you spend so long in the trenches.
Yeah.
Like there were years there, I'll say we went on our first tour in 2009.
Okay.
And I think 2009 to 2011, like literally nobody came. We would get to the venue and it'd be locked up because we didn't sell any tickets, or like, you know, there were shows where one person paid, or if we had a great show in our hometown, like 35 or 40 people would come. So it would at least like fill out a little area in the front of the venue and you could take a picture to make it look like it was kind of full. But then something happened. Like, I think we got access to more resources. We learned from all the mistakes that we had made over the past 3 years. We rebranded. We got the opportunity to open for a lot of the bands that were doing it, which gave us a lot of exposure. We played with the Boys Like Girls guys in Boston. Valencia was a band at Columbia at the time. Cash, I know you're familiar with from all your experience in the dance world. They used to be a Warped Tour band many moons ago. And those things really opened it up for us and kind of put us in the center of the scene that was happening. And all of a sudden, you know, we could sell 100 or 150 or 200 tickets in all these markets. And it became real for a second there. So I think it was surprising when it first happened. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So you put together the band, everything. So what was kind of the turning point after, like when you kind of realized that you don't really want to do the band thing anymore, you want to transition into the business side? And then tell us that gap from there to now where you started your own business, and then you're also the head of streaming and strategy at Crush Music, correct?
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about that gap and then kind of what your role is at Crush Music, a little bit about what you do.
Totally. So I think the turning point for me was I was at school. I was at Northeastern in Boston. And I was at this great school, and I was 2 years in, or 2 years and change, and they had a great music business program. But more than that, it's just an awesome school. So it's one of the best schools in the country. I was so lucky to be able to go there. I was batting way above my pay grade in terms of just being able to go there. I was never a particularly good student. For many reasons, I was super lucky to be there in Boston. And I was 2 years into what was a 5-year program for school. And I was feeling sort of like I was wasting my time a little bit. Like I had now been trying to be a professional performer for the better half of 5 or 6 years. And I just wasn't involved where I was. I wasn't present. If I was at school, I was daydreaming about being somewhere else, or if I was in class, I was making plans for a weekend tour or talking to an agent about a tour, or just, it was all about the band 24/7. I didn't have very many friends at school. And then, one weekend I didn't have anything to do for the band. And a friend of mine took me to a party and he said, come on by. Like, I think a lot of these guys will like you. And I think you'll have fun just like being a little bit more social, a little bit more involved. And that's when I sort of realized that I was maybe wasting an opportunity that not everybody gets. And on top of that, I looked at, I don't want to name names because I love all these bands that we went out with and they're respected artists for the most part. But I looked at these guys that we were touring with and we were opening for, and I wanted to be them so badly. I was like, if we could be signed to this label, or we could be on this tour or play with this, like it would be so great. But when I kind of got to see behind the curtain, it wasn't as glamorous as I would have liked. A lot of these guys were going home to live with their parents, or these girls were going home to live with their parents.
So it wasn't as luxurious as they had set it out to be, or it looks like.
Yeah, there was a huge disconnect between what I thought was success and actual success. And that's another, big part of what, kind of lit a little bit of a fire under my ass. I came back, I immediately pivoted from just studying music business to music and traditional business. So I studied, micro and macroeconomics, accounting, et cetera. And I really wanted to like crack that code and figure out why that was. So I just sort of said, wow, I have all this experience. I know all these people that work with, everyone now from the old punk rock days, like is in the music business now doing something. They work with Justin Bieber or Meghan Trainor, or they're, they became a different band, or they're Cash and they're DJs or whatever it is. Like, so I had this connection to this huge like network of old alt rock touring guys and girls. And I said, all right, well, let's get in on the business side. I was always the business guy in my band. And so I had a studio in my apartment, and I just like did whatever I thought the next step was, which was I was going to find artists. Mm-hmm. So I started this business, and I picked up 2 clients. I managed a kid named Drew Chadwick, who was in the X Factor band Emblem 3, signed to Psycho Sony in 2013-14. And then I picked up a kid from Northeastern called Dylan Rockoff, who became a really great story for my firm. So we started a label, and we quickly realized that labels don't make any money unless your music does, so that we needed to make some money in the meantime. And we started a consulting business, which was basically like, hey, we have all this experience in music. We're also trained in business. So whatever you need help with, we'll help you out. And one thing led to the next. And I think 6 months later, we were doing consulting gigs for everyone on the street, major labels, kids coming out of Berkeley, and everyone in between.
So tell us about some of the other struggles that you had when you first started. Like obviously money is an issue, but what were some of the things that you were doing when you were managing these 2 artists to get them and their names out there?
Oh gosh, I mean, there's a million.
Just some of like the top like 2 or 3 things that you saw success with. I mean, we don't need to know that you were writing postcards and hand delivering them, but just some of the things that you saw the biggest success with.
Well, I think to answer your first question, some of the biggest struggles were that we really didn't have any track record. So we were just kind of making it up as we go. I make a joke when I did my first consulting deal. I got on the phone with someone and they just said, this is what we want to do. And so I said, all right, like this is what it costs. And I just like made up a number, and I was kind of like weighted. I was like, is it too high? Is it too low? And they was like, okay, cool. And they like paid it right away. And I was like, okay, sick. That was all right, I think. So like we had no track record, totally making up as we go. And then there was a huge disconnect in what needed to be done versus what we had infrastructure to support. Mm-hmm. So like, we at one point, and we still do for the most part, did everything. And I mean, like on some of these projects, we like found the talent, wrote the songs, produced the songs, mixed the songs, mastered the songs, did the distribution deals, delivered them to market, did all the artwork, did the social skins, did the advertising, did the PR, did the brand partnership deals. We didn't have an agent, so we were phoning venues to try and string together tours. Then we would get in the car and drive them to the tour dates, unload, tech. I mean, like we were making no money. You know what I mean? This was a money pit. So there, I think at that point, we just had way more work than we could handle. And I had to, over the years, I had to really learn how to work smart and not hard, because you can really quickly, when you're hungry and you're passionate about something, like everyone likes to say, oh, I'm grinding, I'm working, I'm up early, I'm out late, I'm grinding. And it's like, you can do that. And I still do that. And I did that for a long time, but if you're not working productively, that stuff doesn't matter. You're just going to stack up work on top of work, and it's going to go on and on and on. So yeah, that was a big struggle for us.
That's something I've done especially over quarantine. I just realized all the stuff that I was doing, and I had to scale back quite a bit. Man,
you're a workhorse too. I know it. I see it.
I do so many podcasts. I love doing the podcasts. I love connecting with industry professionals and seeing what everybody's doing and getting different oversights and insights on what the industry's doing in various legs. And I just had to cut back. And like you said, it just keeps stacking up, and it just like, it burns you out real quick.
Like when I first moved to the city, I remember, I won't name names, but I had gotten connected with a now very prominent songwriter. And I had gotten in touch with him, and I was really excited. And I was, he said, "Oh, I'm booked for the next however long." And I was all mad at it. And I was bummed. It's like, "Man, you're booked so far out. Like, let's just do a Saturday." And he responded, he said, "Oh, I don't work weekends." And I remember I was so upset about this. I was like, "You don't work weekends, man? Like, you don't get to choose not to work weekends. Like when you have $20 million and all the platinum records you could ever get your hands on, then you cannot work weekends. But until then, you don't get to choose not to work weekends." And I didn't say that to him, but that was what was going on in my head. And now I look back on that, and I'm just sort of like, I almost respect the boundary that he took, because you'll just put yourself in the ground, man. My parents actually, when I first started my business, came into the city and had to have like an intervention with me. They like met me at a coffee shop and like brought my brother, and we're just like, "We're worried about you, man."
That takes a lot though. And it's important that your family recognized that, and they were realizing that, you're going to burn yourself out.
They're good folks.
And yeah, absolutely. Sounds like, yeah. And I've been doing that ever since I was younger. I worked 4 or 5 jobs. Even when I was in 10th grade, I would, I had my own lawn care service. I was doing photography. I worked at the grocery store. I worked at a software company. I was helping the theater department. I was doing so many different things, and it burns you out real quick. For
it
sure.
Does, man. It does. So even today, you're coming straight from the next thing, man. It's impressive. Keep it up, though.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
Within reason.
Yeah, within reason. Absolutely. I've learned to like draw boundaries. And just like, I only do podcasts on these days. I'm only available these times. I'm not doing a podcast at 8:00 on a Saturday night. I'm sorry. It's just, I have boundaries.
Well, good for you, man.
But what's a day in the tell us what a day in the life of you is like at Crush Music. Like, what do you do day to day?
Yeah. So just to reiterate, I'm the head of the streaming strategy and promotion is my fancy business card title. But what that really means is I oversee all digital sales, data, and record consumption for our 33 clients. So for those of you that aren't familiar, we're a leading management firm and full service music company in the space. We manage Lorde, Sia, Fall Out Boy, Panic at the Disco, Train, Alec Benjamin, Skylar Grey are some of our more notable acts, although all of them are fairly notable. And so, I split my job is sort of split into 2 pillars. On the one side, there's data, and on the other side, there's sales. So on the data side, I don't physically do this anymore. There's some folks at the firm that work with me to put it together, but all day, every day, we're compiling, endless amounts of data, monitoring how our records are performing in the market. So some obvious ones, right? Like that I'm sure you can come up with on your own. Domestic streams per week, global streams, save rate, skip rate, if you can get your hands on it, how they're moving through the playlisting ecosystem, how they're being passed from playlist to playlist or being shared. If they're in the editorial system at a DSP, where in the food chain are they living, and how are they performing? Are they over or under indexing? And everything in between. So
what do you mean by over or under indexing?
So when you go to a DSP or you're on whatever it is, Spotify or whatever you use, there are some things that you are consuming that are specific to you. And there are some things that are picked by a human. And the things that are picked by a human are not there by mistake. In fact, they are argued over endlessly what you will see, when and in what order and why. So we have a pretty good idea of wherever a product sits, how it's supposed to perform. And we believe that specific, like when I say over or under indexing specifically, it means is it over or underperforming for where it is. So just like a really generic example will be like the most coveted spot on any DSP in the world should really be the number 1 spot on Spotify's today's top hits. It's the largest playlist in the world. So that should be the top performing record in the world. If number 7 on today's top hits is streaming more than number 1, we would use that as an indication that that record is not as strong. So that's the one side is data, right? And it goes deeper. I work with I work with tons of, I mean, it's not a sexy job, man. I work with tons of people who, are coders, and I have people, I'm working with someone right now who's building me an algorithm that I feed them recordings, and it identifies 200 data points in the recording, and it predicts how the song is going to perform in the market 30, 60, 90 days after street date.
Wow.
So it's very much like I said, like not a sexy part of the job. But then the other side of the job is very much like your traditional sales role. If there's any radio folks out there, I know you talked to Dan at Lakeside, who's a great friend and mentor of mine. If there's any radio, it's very similar to a radio promotion job. It's taking the data that we have and maintaining the relationships at market. So the obvious ones are the DSPs, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, SoundCloud, Deezer, YouTube Music, Tidal. I don't want to leave any out, but any digital DSP, but it goes much farther than that. I work with all the athletic studios, SoulCycle. I work with the companies that program music in retail stores across the country, Best Buys, Staples, Subway stores. Like nothing you're hearing out there is an accident. Movie theaters, elevators, spas, hotel lobbies, like I'm there. Even when you get in your ride share sometimes, I'm tapped into what's playing as you get in the car. So
wow.
I want to make sure that whenever you're out and about, whatever you're hearing, there's a pretty good chance that at least I have a pretty good chance to have it be one of my records.
Yeah. So that's insanity. So when you're collecting I've had a few data scientists or somebody who runs a data company on the show about 2 months ago, and he owns a company called Beat Chain, and it's a big data analytics company. We got like kind of deep into this data stuff, and it was very interesting. So what other types of data and how does somebody collect this data? What types of tools are you using? Are they custom built? Are they is it like a chart metric type thing, or what types of tools are you using to collect this data?
We're definitely using all the ones that are obvious. I mean, you mentioned some of them, right? Like I've got them all, literally. Chart metric is one of the long-standing greats that I would say we use to this day.
Very
and
powerful.
Shout out to Sung Joe and the whole chart metric team.
Yeah.
Great folks over there. But they're not all, that good. The other obvious ones are Nielsen SoundScan, Nielsen Music Connect, BuzzAngle, which later became Alpha Music. I use all those probably on a daily basis. The other obvious ones would be like the ones provided by the companies themselves. Spotify for artists, Apple Music for artists. I was part of the team that tested out the Amazon Music for Artists product. YouTube now has an analytics page. Same, SoundCloud, it has an analytics page as well. So, but on top of that, it's custom built ones as well. I know I mentioned the code that I'm having built. Sometimes the stuff's not offered, so you have to do it yourself. Like we have spreadsheets that calculate. I plug in certain data and it spits out save rate, and everything in between. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah. I mean, the power of a spreadsheet, and I can imagine the amount of spreadsheets that you deal with on a daily basis is astronomical. But how? I'm just trying to wrap my head around all the data. So when you've got the data, what are some of the things you're doing to? I mean, you mentioned getting all the stuff into lobbies, hotels, all that stuff. What are some of the other things that you're using the data for that maybe you wouldn't typically think of?
So the goal with the data is always to convince what we call gatekeepers that they should be supporting a record more than they are, or if they are to continue. So I guess two ways that we use the data. On the streaming side, one example would kind of be along the lines of the one I mentioned earlier. So we all in the music business, especially in the promotion business or in the streaming side, have a really good idea of what these platforms can offer. So if we're seeing that someone else got some of these, or another artist or another record got some of these spots, or let's just use an example, right? I put out a record at Crush and it gets no support from a DSP. At that point, I'm going to look for data to show them that they picked a bunch of songs that aren't performing as well as mine. And so I'm selling them data in that way to say, you need to get on. This is something that's happening. And then furthermore, unlike once you get past that stage and it is supported by DSPs, at that point, you're trying to take it to the next level. You're trying to get the hit status. So in the radio world, we use the data a lot for what we call familiarity. At radio, they use all sorts of research to find out if the consumers in a given market are like familiar with the song, because familiar songs keep them from turning the dial, which allows them to sell ads for more money. So they do all these crazy things like call out, which is where they call you and they play you songs and they see which ones you know. There's auditorium tests. There's all these whack things that don't really make sense. But we use the data, like, you were mentioning, if we're playing music in X amount of retail stores or X amount of movie theaters before a feature film starts, like we can use those numbers and sell them. I don't mean literally sell them, but talk to radio stations about them to say, hey, in your market, we've been doing these things. We're in this many hotels, this many retail stores. There's a pretty good chance that by the time your customer has gotten out of his or her car, walked into the grocery store, bought his or her groceries, had a conversation, gone to the pharmacy and home, they've heard the song 2 or 3 times. So let's try and do that research again and see how familiar the song is. And then, we turn that into, more spins at the format, which turns it into hopefully into more sales, which turns it into a hit, and, more plaques on my wall, I hope.
Yeah.
I got a lot of space here, Lennon. I got a lot of wall space. So,
well, fill them up with some plaques.
Yeah.
So do you have any information or do you have any research or data on how certain music or a song influences somebody's choices at a store? Like, for example, like at a Forever 21, this type of music influences somebody. Like, they're more likely to spend $50 or $100 if this type of music is playing.
I don't have that type of data.
That would be interesting to get.
But I bet, marketers definitely have that data, like people in advertising or marketing at these companies. My girlfriend actually runs advertising for Aerie, American Eagle's brand. So she is in the weeds with this kind of stuff all the time, and she would probably know, but she's much smarter than me, and I can't answer that question at the moment. But I will tell you, we have a pretty good handle on what types of music goes with certain brands. Like, I work with a lot of brands. I had a record that spun in Forever 21 a lot. Weirdly enough, you mentioned that. I didn't get it to them at all. They picked it up organically, but it made sense that they did. And I understood why. I wouldn't send them. I want to be careful about what I say, make sure I'm not saying anything bad, but I probably wouldn't send Forever 21 a Weezer song.
Right.
That doesn't feel like it aligns with their brand bullets, but we did just do a Weezer partnership with Formula One, which felt semi-fitting. So that kind of stuff sort of on gut, at least for the seat that I sit in. But no, there's definitely marketing folks that look at that stuff all day, I'm sure.
Yeah, that would be interesting. It's similar to how Walmart has a specific color scheme, or Target is red, because red influences I think it's your dopamine or something, and it makes you buy more, spend more. So I'm sure it has some type of say in that as well. So when you say who are you reaching out to? How do you get your music into a department store? What is that process even like?
Most department stores are on some sort of you program their music from some sort of parent organization, right? There's a company called Spectrio that I believe sends all these boxes, these physical boxes to their partners, which are the retail stores within their organization, and then they program the music from remotely, and then the people at Spectrio are the ones who are making the programming decision. There's a great team called What's in Store Music, who I would highly recommend if you're looking to get into that space. There's a really great team over there. I can't say enough. good about those guys. I've done a lot of business with them. So they help us cover a lot of, ground that way. But not all retail stores are like in that organization. So you kind of just have to do it piecemeal. Like Starbucks curates internally, obviously. They have such a powerful brand. Like they do all of their curation in-house. They have a music person.
I think they're a partner with Spotify too. I think.
Oh, yeah, there's tons of brands that partner with Spotify.
Yeah, when you go into like the Starbucks app, it tells you like based on your location, it tells you what song is playing, and it's like add to your Spotify. It's like nuts.
The robots, man.
The robots.
They're going to get us, Lennon.
It's like you could go and then you go to the next Starbucks and it's like a totally different playlist, and it's like how the hell do they know that this song is playing at this? It's creepy. But it's genius because it's like making it easy for people. Like, oh, I love this song. Add done. It's quick.
Here's the thing, like more and more now, the music business historically up until, I would say, the last 10 or 15 years has been telling you what to like. You only had so many options. But now the model is they want to know what you like. And in a lot of cases we learned, especially over the last 5-7 years, we didn't even know what we liked, right? So, but the robots monitor our behavior and found out what we liked. And then they started super serving it to us. And now we have a better understanding. And they, whoever they is, the robots and tech companies of the world, it's like kind of know what we all like. So it's interesting how it's changed in that way.
Yeah. I mean, it's like going back and listening to like when I would hear a song on the radio, I would have to have, and you couldn't just buy that one song. You'd have to buy the whole CD. And there was so many times where I would only like 2 songs that I would hear on the radio, and I'd have to buy the whole CD. But it's like you get that CD and you bring it back and you just listen to that same CD over and over and over again. But now you can add something to your playlist, and Spotify is learning, or Apple Music is learning about that type of music. Like, oh, he likes this. He's going to like these other 10 million artists, And it's like music discovery is off the charts.
I could talk about this for days. I mean, as somebody in like the streaming space, this is what gets me out of bed in the morning. I'm super excited about this part of the business. But like, to speak to what you were just saying, like, think about this, right? Until the year 2000, to your point, you heard a record on the radio as a hit, right? So you tell your parents you want to go get it. You go to the record store, you pay $20 for the LP. The record store is claiming, or the record company is claiming $20 from you for that. And they're getting it right all at one time, right? You really only wanted the one song. So, that's why the 90s was the peak of the record business, right? Like printing money. It was insane. Because they were just moving product like this. Then, but that said, iTunes comes along and they say, okay, you can buy one song if you want off the record. So all of a sudden the record business freaks out, right? They were selling 15 songs. Now they're down to just the one you want, right? Then they were like, okay, you don't ever have to buy the song. You can just pay for access to the song, and it's going to be a fraction of what that CD cost for a month. So you might have to pay, you might have to pay for 2 or 3 months before you're paying what you would have paid for one CD before. And the other thing is the spike in income was right when the record was released, right? You sell all the CDs and then it tapers off. And, unless there was some big catalyst along the way, you're never seeing a spike again. Now, your music can pay dividends based on its consumption for its entire lifetime, right? Mm-hmm. Like rather than, so if I buy Lennon's CD and I pay $20 for it, that's it, you get $20. But I might listen to track 2 on Lennon's CD 1 million times. Getting paid for 1 million streams over the course, over that song's lifetime is more than what you would have gotten if I just bought that CD. Mm-hmm. So, that's what gets me out of bed in the morning. I'm excited about that.
Because, you don't earn royalties on CD plays, unfortunately.
That's true, man.
So, it's like the streaming world is so fascinating to me. So when you're reaching, I want to go back to the kind of department store, like getting your music in there. This is something I've never explored. And I've always wondered, like I go into a store and I'm like, where are they getting this? Is it just a Spotify playlist? Is it the
A lot of times it is, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of times it is, and they get like blanket licenses from or whoever. Sometimes,
Or they usually don't, yeah.
or they usually don't. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true. But sometimes I went into like a taco store once, and they had like a BMI sticker on. I'm like, okay, they did it right.
That's a very honorable business.
Yeah.
Shout out to that taco store.
That's why I went there.
Yeah.
But what is it like? Like, how do you reach out to these companies? Is it like pitching them, or what type? Like, what's the strategy to do that? Do you have to have a connect there? Like, what's it like?
Interesting that you're like honing in on this very
fine
detail. This is like
I've never explored
I'm
this.
happy to talk about it. Yeah, like if you're interested in this, like straight up, just like Google it. Like these are companies that want to do business with you. So yeah, there's a few companies out there that do like 70 or 80% of the programming, and I'm sure you're able to find a way in, even indie artists. Cool. What I will say about it is it's not, in my experience, it's not a needle mover. And a needle mover in the business is how we refer to something that directly impacts sales. Mm-hmm. So it tends to not be a needle mover, but it's huge for familiarity, right? So like, have you ever done the thing, like especially now where there's all this music available and someone says, oh, you don't know this song? Like, I love the song, and they're so big, and you're like, no, I've never heard it. And then they play it and you're like, oh no, wait, I think I've heard that, right? That's familiarity kicking in, right? Because you were at the pharmacy and the chorus or the hook or the instrumental hook or whatever it is tattooed on your brain and is reactivated when it's played back to you.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So transitioning a little bit then, you mentioned in the form and when you reached out, discussing like financial literacy, and I think that is super important. So can you explain what that is, and kind of what you mean by that and what it is?
For sure. So this is sort of what I was talking about earlier, when you were asking me sort of why I pivoted to business, and my focus on this topic stems from what I was saying, that, I knew all these people growing up that were like famous to me, or at one point they were like actually famous, right? Like at the height of the pop rock movement, when pop punk music was on the radio, sure. Some of these people were like actually famous. But when I saw behind the curtain, I realized that their life was maybe, or they were maybe just like moderately well off or not very well off at all, which was like concerning to me. Like, not that life is all about money, but I'm a very family oriented person. I want to be able to have a family. I want to be able to provide for them. And it didn't seem like those people were going to be able to follow that path. So that was concerning to me. And I couldn't understand this disconnect. And so I studied traditional business in college, and I learned about all of these things that apparently the rest of the world knows about, the value of the dollar, time value of money, basic investing principles, how to create wealth. And I was like, wow, there's so many people that don't know about this. And these are like really basic things. And I feel like all these people that I love and I respected are like out there getting into trouble. Like they don't even understand, like a lot of these people didn't even understand like what a record advance was. Like they were getting $100,000 check and they'd never had any money before. So they're going, I'm rich. And they're buying it like, I don't want to name names again, but like I have one friend who had a very big song, and he got a major label deal. And this is a song anyone listening to this podcast would know. This is a pop rock banger. And he immediately bought a Mercedes and whatever. And when I checked in with him in 2013, he was working for his father's lawn mowing company down in Florida. And I was like, what, like this, something is not right here, man. Like this is like, you know what I mean? So I actually, coming out of school, I got an offer to go work at Sony Red. And I also got an offer to go work at an investment bank, because I had also studied business in school. And the offers were so different from a monetary standpoint. I said, you know what, like I'm going to go do this banking thing for 2 years. I'm going to like learn everything I can. I'm going to kind of like put that on my resume and use it as a stamp of approval so that I can go do music the way I want and have the money to do it, and sort of have the qualifications to be able to talk about some of this stuff. And that was probably the best decision I made in my career so far. Was going. I worked at Goldman Sachs for 2 years, 2014 to 2016, and I stand by it. Probably one of the single best decisions I've made as a music business professional was being able to put that on my resume and acquire those skills. So now a big thing I work on pretty much with everyone that I work with in the music space is financial literacy and educating as much as I can on how to create wealth and really how to be like, how to exercise financial responsibility. Most of these people that work in our business are living paycheck to paycheck. Cash goes in their checking account, cash goes out. They don't realize that cash that sits in your checking account loses value year over year. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, that's very interesting. It's something that I think I've learned a little bit more about is kind of financial literacy and making sure that I'm kind of setting myself up for success financially. So what types of things would you provide to a musician or give them advice on for financial, especially during this crazy time when maybe money isn't coming in as heavily as it was when they were touring, or, like what are some things that they can do to make sure that they're setting themselves up even though the money isn't coming in?
Well, to answer the first part of your question, I think it's kind of just, it's with my artists, it's just reshaping the narrative around money, right? Like if you get $100, the thought process is not, I have $100. I can go do this. I can do that. The thought process is, okay, at the end of the year, I'm going to have to give $37 to the government. So I really only have, what's left over, right? So then on top of that, from what you have left over, you don't want to be working to your grave. So you got to set some into your retirement. And then you got to set some into what I call a rainy day fund. And then you got to invest some that you can get in the short term. So when you get $100, you really might only have, if you're doing it correctly, you really might only have 25, right? You might put a little bit in a 401k or an IRA. You might put a little bit in an investment account that you want to liquidate before you retire. You might want to put some in a rainy day fund in case you break something that's near and dear to you, or you want to try and save up to get married or whatever it is, and reshaping the narrative that way. And that's really half the battle, in my opinion. That's how you start creating wealth.
So saving all these things and reshaping the narrative is the most important thing, you would say.
Yeah, I mean, reshaping the narrative in that way, right? Like, so as you do that over time, every time you get $100, I mean, like, over the course of 10 years, that's gonna, compound interest, that's going to be, you're going to see some serious growth. You're going to have some real money over the course of 10 years. I mean, there's a great app called Acorns that I love having my artists on. I don't know if you know about this, but what this does is this invests every time you spend your credit card that you have hooked up to the account, it takes the change, rounds up to the next dollar amount, and puts it in an investment account. So I've put it on for a year. Just swipe my card here, and you can put a multiplier on it, right? So if it's 10 cents, you can put a 2x multiplier on it. It takes 20 cents or however you want to do it. I have a 10x multiplier because I'm a psychopath. But I've had it for a year as a test, and I put some of my artists on it. There's like $5,000 or $6,000 in the account just from using my credit card. I don't feel like I'm investing anything. I don't feel like I'm losing any money, but the predictions on the app say that by the time I'm 68, it's going to be over $1 million. So just, little things like that, reshaping the narrative to understand how money works over time.
I was just going to ask you, like, what are some of the resources that you would provide? But Acorns is a great one.
I love Acorns. I kind of get some flack about Acorns because people who like maybe are a little bit more financially literate or are more sophisticated investors say like, oh, well, why wouldn't you just take a lump sum of cash? And I'm trying to explain to them that like, a lot of these people I work with might not have a lump sum of cash or might not be interested. So I think it's a pretty effective way to do it without having to think about it.
I know the biggest thing for me is having a chunk of savings and then trying to figure out where to allocate that to. Like, do you put it into like a high yield savings? Like, where is the best place to put that money?
I think the best place to put it is, in my opinion, is just like an ETF or like an index fund, they're called, right? So basically what this is like there's an S&P 500 index fund. It's basically, it exposes you to the whole S&P 500, which historically over the long term has never failed. It's been constantly growing, right? 7-8% a year, sometimes 9, 10, 11. And it's easy, man. You have $1,000 or $2,000, like it's gonna over time, it's never failed.
That's interesting. So outside of investing in like S&P and, Acorns or whatever, what are some other avenues an artist could invest in? Maybe themselves, if they have to invest in themselves, what are some things they should invest themselves in? Maybe it's marketing, maybe it's, PR is marketing, but maybe it's, new gear. What are some things that maybe could be held off, and what are some things that are like good investments?
I'll preface this by saying, like, just to kind of caveat my answer here, like, I'm just one person, obviously. Sure. Like, I'm not the be all end all. I have my opinions on things, and I'm sure other folks have different answers, but so there's no right or wrong answer here. But for sure, I think so. If you're an independent artist, for me, historically, I've been bearish on publicity. Reason being is publicity is not a needle mover. I usually do it whenever I get with a consulting client or somebody that says they want to spend $3,000 or $4,000 retainer a month on publicity. I run a test. This is the test I do every time. It's never failed once. I say, who was on the cover of Billboard this month? And they can't answer. Exactly. And I say, okay, well, we're not going to get a Billboard cover. So no press you get between here and Billboard is going to be, my point is it's to build the brand when you have the disposable income. It's not a needle mover that's going to, if you can afford it, it's great. If you can't, I would allocate money elsewhere. But it highly depends on what you're doing and who you are. And like, listen, if you're a college touring singer-songwriter or jazz musician, like that's highly niche. That's something where press is pretty important, right? Because that's not like a high consumption genre. There's not going to be like a lot of, there's not like a ton of streaming happening in that market. So press might be a big thing for you and a big way for you to get on festivals or something. So it really depends. I probably didn't specifically answer your question, but
no, that's helpful. I think publicity, like you said, is interesting. And I think a lot of people, I mean, I'm a journalist and I deal with publicists and artists all the time. And
yeah, I should have thought about that before I went off on publicity. Damn, Will.
No, all good. But
I love your writing, Lennon. Don't get me wrong, man.
Thank you. I was going to say, what was my featured story at EDM.com?
I've seen it at EDM.com. I know you have your own.
Yes, I do. Ear Milk. I don't write for Ear Milk anymore, but I did. But yeah, it's there's so many. I've told the story a few times, but it's so interesting to me when artists just hit you up out of the blue, or they have a publicist that I'm sure they're spending thousands of dollars a month on retainer, and they just blindly email me. There is one person, I don't even think they're a real person and I have sent them 4 or 5 emails like, please stop sending me emails. Nobody ever responds. They told them they hit me up all the time for Ear Milk coverage. I tell them I don't write for Ear Milk, and I still get them like weekly, almost every other day. And
I'm sure you're on like a distribution or something.
Yeah, I don't even think this is a real person. It's just a fake email account that they use. And I started marking them as spam. I'm like, Jesus
and they're charging someone $2,500 a month to like email you that, by the way.
Yeah, I know. It's sad. And I'm just like spam. And it's just like, would you just stop, please? It just doesn't end.
I mean, like, listen, again, it like highly depends like on what you're doing, but I would say I've been historically bearish for independent artists in specific genres to invest in that area. I've also been, this is a controversial one, been pretty bearish on live, like performances, depending on what genre you're in, but like for 2 reasons. One, if you have a finite amount of money to spend, live is the quickest way to throw it away. You've got transportation, merchandise. You probably can't sell any tickets. You're probably not getting a guarantee. You might have band members. You got to feed everyone. I mean, it's the quickest way. A show a state away is the quickest way to lose $1,000. On top of that, we live in this world where everything that we publish as musicians on the internet is highly polished, right? It's not like the old days where like you listen to a recording and it might like actually resemble what you're going to hear. Like we live in a world where like artists can't even figure out how to perform what they've released usually. You know what I mean? They're like trying to figure out how to get it across. So especially if you're in like the pop space that's high, like let's just use, for example, like a female pop artist who are historically very shiny, very polished. It's this sort of this like idea that you can't attain them, right? Like you picture them almost at an arena surrounded by security when you're looking at their Spotify because their press shots are beautifully touched and they look like they could have been Madonna and the whole thing, right? So maybe going to play like Hotel Cafe if that's what you're trying to do is not the best idea, in my opinion.
That's a valid point. It's true. And like you said, it varies person by person. Like, what are your goals?
Totally.
Maybe you don't want to be a performing artist. Maybe you just want to be a streaming artist. That's totally fine.
And stylistically too. It's like, again, like if you're a jazz musician, like you got to be playing all the time.
Absolutely. Cool. Well, this was an incredible conversation. This was great. I think that's a good place to kind of wrap this up. So before I let you go, how can the listeners keep up with you, reach out if they have any questions, and just keep up with you and everything that you're doing out there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, feel free to email me. It's Will, WILL @crushmusic.com. I try to respond to all the emails I get. So, please, if you just want to talk shop or whatever it is, please feel free to reach out. I also, I program a weekly mixtape on Spotify. It's called Your Favorite Mixtape. Give it a follow. It's about 3,500 followers strong now. So I usually update it on Fridays. But Lennon, I appreciate you, man. And I did this in the last one, but someday I'm going to start a podcast. I'm going to interview you because you just let me come on here and talk about myself for an hour, which I'm sure nobody asked for. So one day we're going to flip this around and we're going to get a great story from you, man. So I appreciate your time.
Sure. I'd appreciate that. Yeah. And if you ever need help starting a podcast, let me know. I'm more than happy to help you out there.
Lennon, you're a good man. We'll talk soon. All right. Thanks for making the time.
Of course.
All right,
Take care.
See you, brother.
Stay
Have
safe.
a good one.
Bye-bye.